The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
Hi everybody, it's Peter Evers here and welcome to Humanity First. And today we are going to talk about something that really does speak to our humanity, and that is the issue of the unhoused. This is obviously a problem that exists across the world, and I'm going to be a little bit direct and talk about what's going on in Brockton at the moment, because it is rather significant. And a little later in the program, we're going to have Mary Corlin, who is Director of Harm Reduction Services here at BAMSI, talk a little bit about the issue. There is no question that there are in downtown Brockton a number of people who are unhoused, who are really struggling with the disease of addiction, and often are living rough on the streets. Recently, there's been a High Court decision that has decided that it is allowable for cities to pass ordinances that actually restrict people's ability to be out in the street. And last week, that one of the such ordinance was passed by the City Council, and that ordinance is preventing tent structures to be allowed on the streets and parks of Brockton. And that does have some significance to those folks that we'll talk about in a little while. But there's a couple of other ordinances that city councillors are going to be considering within the next couple of weeks. One of those is the ability to distribute syringes and needles, clean needles for people, which is part of a harm reduction stance in addiction work, and also a loitering ordinance as well, which bans people in numbers hanging around on the street, which again is something which we're going to talk about, which has significant consequences, I think, for everybody in the city of Brockton. There is a feeling that something has to be done, and I totally understand that, but I don't agree with the fact that what we're doing is we're attacking the people who are struggling with addiction and making it more difficult for them to exist on the streets. And until we have a proper public health response to the unhoused and to addiction in America, we are going to be continually struggling with this, and we're going to be identifying the individuals who have the disease and who are unhoused as the problem. And it really is a social justice issue as far as I'm concerned. So stick around, because Mary Corlin is going to shed some more light on this when we get back. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm an essential worker here at BAMSI, and I'm a nurse. Nurses are essential here at BAMSI because as nurses, we really have the opportunity to make an impact. We have very small ratios, so we have the opportunity to really learn everything about the person served and be able to give the best care. It really serves such a great purpose for me as being a nurse, and really why I came into nursing. Learn more about nursing opportunities at bamsijobs.org.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
And welcome back, everybody. As promised, in the first half of the part of the show, we have Mary Corlin with us. Hi, Mary. How are you?
I'm very good, Peter. How are you?
I'm very well. And Mary is our recently new senior Director of HIV Services.
Yes.
It is great to have you on the show again.
Thank you for having me again.
It's probably about a year ago, wasn't it?
It's been a while,
Yeah.
But I've been on a few times.
Yeah. So rather a lot's happened since we last met. And in the first segment of the show, I was really talking about, generally speaking, in the United States, there is a lack of attention really being paid in terms of a public health model for the unhoused, and also I think, and I've been talking about this for 35 years now, in terms of addiction as well, that we have struggled as a nation to really come to terms with the fact that that addiction is a disease of the brain, and it is not a choice. And there is still so much evidence to the contrary in terms of what conventional wisdom states. And we spend a lot of time addressing that, I think, in terms of what we're dealing with is human beings who are suffering, human beings who oftentimes, and most of the time I would say, are dealing with trauma, are dealing with issues that happened in early childhood and throughout. And many people talk about addiction as a maladaptive coping mechanism. And I like that, because what do we do when we're in pain as human beings? We seek to alleviate the pain, right?
Yes.
And that to me is really what happens. That's rather in stark contrast, if you ask me, to what is happening in the world at the moment in terms of the unhoused. And I think we know that out of California came a decision that ordinances could be passed in local cities and towns that prevented or made it very difficult for people to be out on the street, as if it were a choice.
Right.
And it comes close to home, doesn't it, when in Brockton we found out a few months ago that the City Council were considering 3 different ordinances. And one of those passed last week.
Yes.
And I will say that I'm really proud to say that Mary and other colleagues from BAMSI, but also from other agencies like Brockton Neighborhood Health Center, protested with placards, peacefully and quietly.
Yes, we did.
While the decision was made by, I think, a vote of 8 to 3, was it?
I think it was 7-4.
7-4.
Yeah, 7-4.
That's right. By the city councillors. I will say that the mayor of Brockton did oppose this vote. Obviously, didn't have any choice in that. Let's start though by talking about what that ordinance was, Mary, and what that means, because I think when we talked about this yesterday in prep, it was a very stark picture that you painted.
Yeah. So the ordinance that was passed makes it illegal or criminalizes any camping on public properties. So they can fine people up to $200 a day for camping outside. And what I was told was that if they had a structure, so they say they're using the term camping, and when they say that, they mean being in a tent. So if they are sleeping outside in a tent, they will be asked to take their tent down, move along, and if they don't, they will be fined. But I did ask the question, if they don't have a tent, do they receive a fine? And I was told, no, they will not. So what they're really doing is removing their protection from the elements, which is only going to create so many health issues and creates so many more problems than solve anything. And the real issue that we took with this ordinance was that there's no alternative solutions. There's no, okay, please take your tent down. You can go here. You can go to this shelter. There aren't any shelter beds. There isn't any alternative solutions for these people to go to. So it's really, it's not solutions based. It's not going to help any of these people. It's just going to make their lives so much more difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting, really, because the idea really is to move people along. That's it, right?
Right.
But ironically, as you just said, what it actually does is not necessarily move people along. It just makes them more vulnerable to death.
Yes.
Which is something that I really worry about for officials in the city of Brockton, because that's going to be a story.
Absolutely.
It was a story in the Globe last week. It was on NPR the week before. And while I understand that the City Council want to do something, doing something carries a great deal of peril. Mm-hmm. Of course, it carries a great deal of peril for those people who are exposed to the elements, as you say. But I think politically it poses a great deal of peril, because you're going to see a story on the front pages of the newspaper that say that the thing that was protecting the individual who was sleeping on the sidewalk or whatever was removed, and that person didn't move, and they may have been in the throes of addiction, or they may have been high or something like that, and so not capable of moving on, and then they're in real danger of passing away.
Right.
So that is interesting, and the moving along thing interests me as well, because where would they go?
Right.
Now, I believe that the mayor may well be vetoing this ordinance in respect to saying, well, if the shelters are full, then the police and safety officers will not be enforcing this. Is that right?
Well, that is what we were really pushing for. We had requested to speak at these meetings and to suggest that they, we are a right to shelter state, and right now our shelters are full. There's no shelter beds. So in instances like this, when there is no shelter beds available, they shouldn't be able to enforce these ordinances. And we were not allowed to come speak. It was a private meeting. And that's why we ended up protesting peacefully. But I have heard the same thing. I really hope that the mayor does veto it and sends it back for some edits, because that, at least would be a step in the right direction. You can't just, the issue isn't going to just go away because you find people.
What I know, there's a great deal of irony in this, and I also know that people want something to happen because they think their quality of life has been diminished by this, and I don't want to sort of brush that away. But I was thinking about this the other day, that in England in 1600, and I know I'm old, but I wasn't around then, but in 1600 they passed a law in the country that was actually called the Poor Laws. It was before political correctness came along, and it talked about it was wrong for cities and towns to move people along just because they were poor.
Right.
That there was a moral responsibility of a group or a population to care for everybody. And it does ring rather interestingly for me that 400 years ago we were recognizing that was morally wrong, and that we do have an obligation as human beings to care for everybody. And as often is said, the mayor, and again I'm happy that he's considering this veto, is the mayor of all Brocktonians, right? And that really is, and you and I spoke about this a little bit, this is a moot point for me, because human beings are human beings.
Right.
But at the same time, one of the things we hear a lot about is, well, these are people who come in from other towns and other counties, that kind of thing. These folks, these human beings. You are oftentimes what stands between them and disaster, because you are providing harm reduction services for those, and that's Narcan. That's a whole bunch of things. We'll talk about that in a minute, because I think it's quite important. These people, and so you must be really hurt by this. You must feel that, why is it that we're distinguishing between people who are unprivileged, vulnerable, and often very sick, and regular citizens? And that for me, it just felt strange that we're doing that in 2024, when in 1600, as a society, we were saying, actually, that's not the right thing to do. Right.
And it's a very, very thin line between what they're seeing as people that are not deserving of our support and people that are deserving of our support. I'm a lifelong Brockton resident. I work in the city. I shop in the city. I spend my money in the city. I go to community events. But I'm also a person that has been homeless. I'm also a person that is an addict in recovery. I've been a part of that population of people that are living on the streets, that the city sees as a burden that they have no responsibility to help. And, there's no difference. I am those people. We're the same. So it's very disheartening to see the city that I grew up in and that I love making decisions like this.
Yeah, it must really hurt. When I think about us as a group of people who are humanists, in terms of thinking about how do we make a society where everybody has a fair shot. I also think about, well, what are we going to do? What are the alternatives that we can suggest? And I think that's a good way to start, right? So let's start with that around harm reduction, because there is a lot of conventional wisdom out there that sort of says, well, harm reduction, why are we doing that? Why don't we just get people to be sober, clean, or whatever those sort of pejorative terms are? Tell me a little bit about harm reduction, just so that everybody knows, because it's a very generic term, right?
So harm reduction is, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is reducing harm. So a lot of people think of harm reduction in relation to substance use and public health, but in the bigger picture, almost everybody uses harm reduction practices in their everyday lives. When you wear a helmet, when you put on sunscreen, when a bartender decides to stop serving somebody that has had enough to drink, or when you and your friends go out for a few drinks and you decide to leave your cars at home and Uber back to your houses, those are all harm reduction practices. In relation to substance use and public health, it is, to me, it's understanding that people have, autonomy. They're going to choose to do what they're going to do. And we understand that there are some people that are not ready for sobriety. They're not ready for recovery. And we want to ensure that those people are safe while they're doing the things that they're doing. So if they're using substances, we want to make sure that they're using substances in the safest way possible. Years ago, there was no access to syringes, new unused syringes. People would make syringes out of things. They would reuse the same syringe 20 times over and over again, which causes, sharing needles alone spreads disease. Reusing syringes causes abscesses and infections and things that can cause amputations or
Requiem
death.
for a Dream.
Yeah.
When you think about what
my
happens
goodness.
in popular culture, train spotting,
Yeah.
you think of those things. This is this. Actually, I thought was a fairly good representation of what it's like without harm reduction.
It really is. That is the reality. We had a participant that came in about 2 years ago. We had a participant. He came in, he had an abscess and it was pretty bad. And I wanted him to go to the emergency room, but he had been treated badly by medical staff in a hospital in the past. And he refused to go to the emergency room. And he said, let me think about it over the weekend and I'll come back and maybe I'll go. And I didn't see him for 2 weeks. And when he returned, his arm was amputated from that abscess. And these are things that are still happening today, even with, syringe service programs and access to harm reduction supplies. So our job isn't done yet. We still need to be able to provide a clean, unused syringe for every time somebody injects. And some people may think that we're giving out too many. They think it's an excessive amount. But when you think about a person living with HIV that's going to inject drugs over the weekend with a group of other people, we don't want to just make sure that that person has enough syringes and materials to use safely, but we want to think about the people that they may be with.
Right, and how often
Also.
they're going to be
Right.
injecting. You know, we don't have too much time left, Marion, but obviously I love it when you come on the show because it's so dear to my heart as well. But, you know, I think, you know, when we talk about, there's two things I just want to mention in the last few minutes. Mm-hmm. One is again, there's a conventional wisdom that treating addiction is really, really difficult. Now, yes, it is. But if you look at chronic diseases, it's a disease, right? And the CDC, this is me talking, this is the Center for Disease Control. And if you look at those statistics, addiction, the disease of addiction has better recovery rates than any other chronic disease, right? And you're a living example of that, right? And you said it before. You're somebody who earns a living. You're somebody who spends. You're somebody who contributes to the margin of the city and the state and all of those things. It's a pretty short-sighted view to think that somebody who might be at a very acute stage of their illness and their disease doesn't have or shouldn't have a chance to recover and to get to a place where, like you're playing this role of giving back, and you're playing this role of being a part of an amazing network. And if you think about it, it is one of the most amazing voluntary networks, in the world. We're not paying attention to humanity if we're doing that. We're just writing people off at a very early stage of the recovery process, and that's not acceptable to us. But secondly, what is it? What's the solution? Because I think people are looking for a lot of direction in terms of what a solution is. You know, I began the show by saying, you know, it really is about what's our public health response to this? What's our policies around this? But, you know, in the last minute or so, what is, I mean, I know it's a multifaceted solution that is going to cost a lot of money. But by the way, it's costing a lot of money now.
Exactly.
That poor individual who had their arm amputated, I would imagine cost the state an awful lot of money in terms of medical bills, etc. We're paying one way or another, right?
Absolutely. Yep. So I think that the biggest thing is that there's not just one thing that we need to focus on. There are so many different things that are at play when it comes to, you know, trying to solve these issues. Mental health is a huge part of substance use in the unhoused population. So many people are struggling with, you know, different mental health conditions. Housing, of course, is huge. It's really difficult to even begin to think about sobriety or recovery when your only thoughts are where your next meal is going to come from or whether you're going to have a roof over your head that night. I think for myself, having a support network of my peers, people that are like me, that are going through the same things that I'm going through, was huge, but also having a personal support network, my family, my friends that were really supportive. You know, you kind of have to cut out the people that are negatively affecting your life. But again, I think that the city of Brockton should really take a collaborative approach. We have so many great resources and so many great programs. If we could all work together instead of, you know, in silos and sometimes even working against each other, I think it would go a long way to, you know, making an impact. Yeah,
Mary, that is such a wise statement and probably a good one to end on. And there is so much more that we can do, and there are more resources that we need to, in a way, divert from the post-acute side to the preventive side in terms of working with people. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful 20 minutes, which is kind of a long time for this show, but it just flew by. Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you for having me. I always love being here. Thank you so much.
I love it too.
All right.
Bye, everybody.